roar of engines echoed through the massive glass-walled factory, a cathedral of steel and speed where million-dollar race cars were born. Engineers in crisp uniforms moved with purpose, tablets in hand, while executives observed from above like kings watching their empire grow. But down on the greasy concrete floor, unnoticed and uncelebrated, worked a man named Daniel Reeves. Daniel wasn't dressed like the others. His overalls were worn, stained with oil that no detergent could ever fully erase. His hands were rough, scarred from years of labor, but steady, unbelievably steady. While others relied on machines and software, Daniel relied on instinct, on a connection to engines that bordered on something spiritual. To them, he was just a maintenance worker, a nobody. But every time a car refused to start, every time a system malfunctioned, every time a perfectly designed engine failed, they called Daniel. He never argued, never demanded recognition. He simply fixed it. And then he went home, to a small apartment where his 6-year-old daughter Lily waited for him with a smile that made everything worth it. That morning, tension filled the factory. The CEO himself, Victor Hale, was coming. Victor Hale wasn't just powerful, he was feared. A man known for ruthless decisions, for cutting employees without hesitation, for valuing results above all else. Under his leadership, the company had grown into a global racing giant. But inside, the culture had changed. Fear replaced passion. Silence replaced creativity. When Victor entered, the entire factory seemed to stiffen. Conversations stopped. Tools slowed. Eyes avoided his. He walked through the floor like a judge passing through a courtroom, his sharp gaze catching every flaw. And then, a problem. One of the newest race cars, the company's pride, refused to start. Engineers scrambled. Diagnostics were run. Systems checked. Everything appeared perfect. But the engine remained dead. Victor's expression darkened. "Who approved this?" he demanded coldly. No one answered. Then someone whispered, almost reluctantly, "Call Daniel." Daniel stepped forward quietly, wiping his hands on a cloth. He didn't look at the CEO. He didn't need to. He looked at the car. He listened. He placed his hand on the engine like a doctor feeling a pulse. Then, without asking permission, he picked up a wrench and began working. The engineers watched in discomfort. The CEO watched in irritation. "How long will this take?" Victor snapped. Daniel didn't respond. A few precise adjustments, a slight tightening, a subtle shift no machine could detect. Then, he stepped back. "Try it." The engine roared to life. Not just running, perfectly synchronized, smoother than anyone had ever heard. For a moment, silence. Even Victor seemed impressed. But only for a second. Then his face hardened again. "Who gave you permission to touch this car?" he said sharply. Daniel finally looked up. "It needed fixing." "That's not your job." The words hit like a hammer. The room froze. And in that moment, without knowing who Daniel really was, without understanding the history buried beneath those worn overalls, Victor Hale made the decision that would destroy everything. "You're fired." Daniel didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply nodded once, placed the wrench back on the table, and walked away as if nothing inside him had shattered. The engineers watched in silence, some confused, some uncomfortable, but none brave enough to speak. Victor Hale had made his decision, and in this company, his word was final. As Daniel reached the exit, the sound of the engine he had just fixed echoed behind him, strong, flawless, alive. Ironically, better than ever. Outside, the world felt quieter, real, human. Daniel took a deep breath, pulling out his phone. A picture of Lily smiled back at him. He whispered softly, "It's okay. We'll figure it out." But what no one inside that factory realized was that they had just let go of the one man who understood every bolt, every wire, every heartbeat of their machines. Back inside, the engineers returned to their work, but something felt off. One senior engineer, Marcus, stared at the engine Daniel had fixed. Something about it was different, cleaner, more efficient, almost perfected. "How did he do that?" someone muttered. Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the archive room later that evening, curiosity pulling him deeper. He accessed old files, design blueprints, early prototypes, internal memos from years ago. And then, a name. Daniel Reeves. Again, and again, and again. His hands trembled slightly as he opened more documents. Core engine architecture, suspension innovations, performance upgrades that had made the company famous. All traced back to Daniel, but not as a maintenance worker. As the original lead designer, Marcus rushed to the executive floor the next morning. "Sir, I think there's been a mistake," he said carefully. Victor didn't even look up. "There hasn't. Daniel Reeves, he's not just—" "I know exactly who he was," Victor interrupted coldly. The room went silent. Victor leaned back slowly. He was part of the old system, emotional, unpredictable. People like him don't belong in a modern company. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "Sir, he didn't just work here. He built this place." Victor finally looked at him, eyes sharp, unmoved. Then he should have stayed in his place. And just like that, the truth was buried. It started small, a minor malfunction during testing, then another, and another. Cars that were once flawless began showing strange inconsistencies. Engines overheated, performance dropped. Systems clashed in ways no one could explain. The engineers ran diagnostics again and again. Everything looked perfect, but nothing worked perfectly anymore. The harmony was gone. Within weeks, the company's biggest race approached. Millions were at stake. Reputation, power, legacy. The new flagship car was rolled out with confidence, but during final testing, the engine failed. Completely. In front of investors, in front of media, in front of Victor Hale. The silence that followed was devastating. For the first time, fear appeared in Victor's eyes. Late that night, the engineering team gathered, exhausted, defeated. And then Marcus spoke. "We need Daniel." No one argued, because deep down, they all knew. Daniel sat on the floor of his small apartment, helping Lily with her homework. "Is this right, Baba?" she asked. He smiled softly. Perfect. For him, this moment mattered more than any engine, any company, any title. But the knock on the door changed everything. Marcus stood outside, awkward, nervous. "We need your help." Daniel said nothing. They're failing. Everything is falling apart. Still silence. Marcus swallowed. You were right. You always were. Daniel looked at Lily, then back at Marcus. I never said I was right. Then why help us before? Daniel's voice was calm. Because the cars deserved better. Daniel stood up slowly. I'll help. Relief flooded Marcus's face, but Daniel raised a hand. On one condition. Marcus nodded quickly. Anything. Daniel's eyes hardened slightly. I don't work under Victor Hale. Victor didn't like it, not one bit. But he had no choice. The company was crumbling, and Daniel was the only one who could save it. Bring him in, Victor said through clenched teeth. When Daniel walked back into the factory, everything felt different. People didn't ignore him anymore. They watched him, respected him. He moved through the machines like a conductor guiding an orchestra, adjusting, refining, restoring balance. And slowly, the engines began to sing again. Victor finally approached him. You built all this, didn't you? Daniel didn't look up. I built what mattered. Victor hesitated, for the first time in years. He didn't have control. Race day arrived. The world watched. The car roared onto the track, stronger than ever. Every turn, every acceleration, perfection, against all odds. They won. Not just a race. A statement. The company was alive again. Back in the garage, everyone celebrated. But Daniel stood quietly to the side. Victor approached him one last time. You could have had everything. Daniel shook his head slightly. I already do. Daniel didn't stay. He left the company behind, this time on his own terms. No anger, no regret. He opened a small workshop, not for profit, not for fame, but for passion, and for Lily. Years later, people would still talk about the greatest engineer the racing world ever had. But Daniel never cared about being remembered. Because in the end, he wasn't building cars, he was building a life. Months passed after the legendary race. The company had recovered. Profits surged. Investors returned. Victor Hale was once again praised as a genius leader who had saved the company. But inside the factory, something had changed. People spoke Daniel's name in quiet respect. Not loudly, not officially, but in whispers. Because everyone knew the truth, even if it was never publicly acknowledged. Meanwhile, in a small corner of the city, Daniel's workshop slowly gained attention. It wasn't flashy. No glass walls, no corporate branding, just pure craftsmanship. People didn't come for luxury. They came for perfection. And Daniel delivered, every time. One evening, as Daniel was closing his workshop, a sleek black car stopped outside. Victor Hale stepped out. No entourage, no assistants. Just him. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Victor said quietly, You've done well. Here. Daniel wiped his hands, calm as ever. I'm doing what I always did. Victor looked around the small workshop, simple tools, modest space, yet everything felt alive. More alive than his billion-dollar factory. I want you back, Victor said, not as an order, as a request. Daniel didn't hesitate. No. Victor blinked, slightly surprised. You haven't even heard the offer. I don't need to. The words were firm, but not angry. Victor stepped closer. I can give you resources, power, a team. You could change the entire industry. Daniel looked at him steadily. I already did. Silence filled the space. For the first time, Victor realized something he had never understood before. Daniel didn't need the company. The company had needed Daniel. One afternoon, Lily sat in the workshop, watching her father work. Baba, she asked, why don't you go back to the big company? Daniel smiled faintly. Because I already have everything I need. She tilted her head. But they have faster cars, Daniel chuckled softly. Speed isn't everything. He placed a small tool in her hand. What matters is how you build something. Years began to pass. Lily grew older, spending more time in the workshop, learning, observing, understanding. She wasn't just watching engines. She was learning her father's philosophy. Precision, patience, respect for the craft. And one day, she fixed her first engine. Daniel didn't praise her loudly. He simply nodded. And that meant everything. Far away, in a towering office, Victor Hale stood looking out over the city. He had everything: power, money, control. But something still felt empty. On his desk sat a single file: Daniel Reeves. Victor closed it slowly. For once, he didn't feel like the most powerful man in the room, because he finally understood a truth that couldn't be bought, controlled, or forced. Some people don't build success for recognition. They build it because it's who they are, and those people can never truly be replaced.